Well, Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I am excited to be moving closer and closer to the fall feasts, as we call them, the appointed times that fall in the autumn of the year. And I am looking forward to this message because I feel like it corresponds directly with the change that After's Heart Ministry has made, that will become more evident at the beginning of the next Torah cycle. Of course, while I was up in the mountains, kind of seeking the face of the creator of the universe, I received the theme for next year, which I'll be announcing at after the Feast of Tabernacles, after Sukkot. At any rate, so let's see how I want to do this. First of all, there's something you need to know. I have preached two messages. I put the three up there. I've preached two messages in which I had doubts about what I was supposed to do, and I looked it up before the service. Both of those messages tanked so badly. One of them I actually misspoke, and the entire message was based upon a false foundation at the beginning, because I had looked at a website, confirmed what I thought it said, but it had said something different. And during Midrash, one of my congregation members is like, no, wait a minute, this is the complete opposite of this. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the whole message. That was the whole message. So I found it prudent not to prepare, right? Because it seems as though that's not how the universe wants this to happen with you guys. That can sometimes become uncomfortable. At any rate, the reason I bring this up is because something very interesting happened this morning. This morning, I was, it's very rare that I'll like go and I'll find the scripture, put it on my tablet so that it's ready to load. But every now and then I'll do that. And it's usually kind of like just following my nose, just trying to feel what I'm supposed to do when I'm supposed to do it. Well, what was interesting is this morning I actually read through all of Deuteronomy 29 and 30 and felt the intuition that you all need to hear these words. Now, there's something interesting about that, because really, actually, the word mikra, when it says you shall have a holy convocation, in the Hebrew, that's mikra, and it means to read out loud or to cry out loud, okay? And we have basically kind of concluded that that is kind of what Ezra had designed, that the marketplace was the location where all the people gathered to do their businesses and all that. And so in the marketplace, which obviously would also be the place of most possible corruption, both in politics and in commerce, the Torah was to be read out loud where everyone would hear it. So I got a picture like this guy with this megaphone, right? But the premise is that for 6 days, the Torah would be read, and Ezra designed it to be broken up into a 6-day period. In the seventh, there would be a spiritual leader, the priest, the scribes, the teachers of the law, who would actually expound upon a section of it. And so the whole week it would be read. Well, eventually that led to a part of the Torah portion being read on the seventh day, and that being what's expanded upon, and then eventually led to the Haftarah portion, or the prophets, to be read on the Sabbath day, and that expanded upon. In fact, when Yeshua goes in Luke chapter 4, verse 16, he goes in, he opens the scroll, speaks from Isaiah, and then he says, today these are fulfilled in your hearing. And everybody just went crazy, right? That's because it was accustomed to read the Torah portion and the Haftarah portion, and then to have an itinerant rabbi, only rabbis, stand up and teach the people. Sit down and teach the people and have the people stand up. That was one of the things they did, but that's irrelevant. So why is this so important? Well, because it's interesting that as we come to the end of the Shavuot season, we start to head into the Sukkot season, or the season of the covering, the season of the shelter, we are going to be stepping into an expansion on the intention of the intensification of all power in the universe to communicate instruction to us. Okay. So there's a few reasons why this is important, but the biggest reason is because we are going to first read through Deuteronomy chapter 29 and 30. Okay. We're not going to read through 28, but I can tell you, if you really want to get a picture of what is going on, you need to read 28. But 29 and 30 is what we're going to read today. Okay. So, and my emphasis is intentional, just so you know. My emphasis is intentional. So we will go ahead and jump over to the Blue Letter Bible app, and I will get to reading to you. Okay, so we're out of the NLT version. We'll go ahead and check our footnotes every time they're available just to see what we got going on. Okay, so it says verse 29 is actually numbered as 2869 in the Hebrew text. So intriguingly enough, in the Hebrew text, verse 1 of 29 is actually in the curses of 28. Isn't that interesting? Okay, here we go. These are the terms of the covenant Yahweh commanded Moses to make with the Israelites while they were in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant he had made with them at Sinai. In the Hebrew, it says Horeb, not Sinai. That might be important, but we'll keep going. Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, "You have seen with your own eyes everything Yahweh did in the land of Mitzrayim to Pharaoh and all his servants and his whole country." Before we go any further, let's observe something. Did this generation that was about to go into the promised land actually see with their own eyes what Yahweh did to the Egyptians? Answer: no, unless they were children under the age of 20 at the time of the numbering, and they were going and they survived to the next generation that was going to be going into the promised land. We know that they may not have seen with their own eyes, but who did? Joshua and Caleb definitely were witnesses, because on the mouth of two or three witnesses let everything be established. But what y'all don't know is that you had to be a certain age before you could bear witness. Okay, so you had to be at least 12 years old, but we'll get into that, or we won't get into that today. Okay, so here we go. All the great tests of strength and miraculous signs and amazing wonders. But to this day, Yahweh has not given you minds that understand, nor eyes that see, nor ears that hear. For 40 years I led you through the wilderness, yet your clothes and sandals did not wear out. You ate no bread and drank no wine, nor other alcoholic drink, but he gave you food, so you would know that he is Yahweh your Elohim. And of course, you know that's the vow of the Nazarite. So the entire Israelite nation was actually under the vow of the Nazarite. That's another midrash, though. When we came here, King Sihon of Heshbon, that's Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan came out to fight against us, but we defeated them. Remember, those were giants. We took their land and gave it to the tribes of Reuven and Gad, and to half the tribe of Manasseh as their grant of land. Therefore, interesting. Therefore, obey the terms of this covenant so that you will prosper in everything you do. I will bet you guys that you think there is only one covenant. And I am here to tell you that the covenant was renewed, or a new covenant was given over and over and over again in the wilderness to the Israelites. In fact, almost every time there was a big sin, there was a big covenant. And it was a renewing or a restating of the old covenant. So it wasn't as if the old covenant was passing away and dying, but instead that the renewed covenant contained the same information with a rededication to what? To the marriage, right? Okay. All of you tribal leaders, elders, officers, all the men of Israel are standing today in the presence of Yahweh, your Elohim. Why is that important? Because they are the ones who can bear witness to judgment. Your little ones and your wives are with you, as well as foreigners among you who chop your wood and carry your water. Intriguing. We never heard about that, did we? Where did they come from? You are standing here today to enter into the covenant of Yahweh, your Elohim. Yahweh is making this covenant. Yahweh is making this covenant, including the curses. By entering into the covenant today, he will establish you as his people and confirm that he is your Elohim, just as he promised you and as he swore to your ancestors, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. But you are not the only ones with whom I am making this covenant with its curses. I am making this covenant both with you who stand here today in the presence of Yahweh, our Elohim, and also with the future generations who are not standing here today. Sounds interesting. You remember how we lived in the land of Egypt and how we traveled through the lands of the enemy nations as we left. Important point to be made here. The lands of the enemy nations who they traveled through were Midian, Moab, Edom, and the wilderness land of Sin, where Abimelech, where the Amalekites were marauders. Okay. You have seen their detestable practices and their idols made of wood, stone, silver, and gold. I'm making this covenant with you so that no one among you, no man, no woman, clan, or tribe will turn away from Yahweh, our Elohim, to worship these Elohim of other nations, so that no root among you bears bitter and poisonous fruit. Whoa, what in the world is that about? Those who hear the warnings of this curse should not congratulate themselves thinking, I am safe, even though I am following the desires of my own stubborn heart, Christians. This would lead to utter ruin. The Lord will never pardon such people. Instead, his anger and jealousy will burn against them, Christians. All the curses written in this book will come down on them, and Yahweh will erase their names from under heaven. Remember that part where he says, I never knew you, you workers of Torahlessness? Okay. Yahweh will separate them from all the tribes of Israel to pour out on them all the curses of the covenant recorded in the book of instruction. That's interesting. So the tribes of Israel were the ones who would have these curses fall upon them. Very interesting. Then the generations to come, both you, your own descendants, and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the devastation of the land and the diseases the Lord that Yahweh inflicts on it. They will exclaim, the whole land is devastated by sulfur and salt. Wow, that's interesting. It is a wasteland with nothing planted and nothing growing, not even a blade of grass. It is like the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which Yahweh destroyed in his intense anger. And all the surrounding nations will ask, why has Yahweh done this to this land? Why is he so angry? And the answer will be, this happened because all the people of the land abandoned the covenant that Yahweh, the Elohim of their ancestors, made with them and when he brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. Instead, they turned away to serve and worship gods they had not known before. Serve and worship Elohim they had not known before, Elohim that were not from Yahweh. That is why Yahweh's anger burned against this land, bringing down on it every curse recorded in this book. In great anger and fury, Yahweh uprooted his people from their land and banished them to another land where they still live today. I want to make a point really quick. In verse 27 says, that is why Yahweh's anger has burned against this land, bringing down on it every curse recorded in this book. You need to know that Moses is giving a speech. However, he's claiming that it's a book. So he knew that it was either being transcribed or that all of this was going to later be written down, right? In great anger and fury, Yahweh uprooted his people from their land and banished them to another land where they still live today. Sounds kind of like what's going on in the world today, where you and I, as Israelites, are exiled from our promised land, promised to our ancestor Abraham. You say, wait a minute, I'm not a Jew. Nope, that's not what I said. You are an Israelite. Why? Because you name the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. Yahweh, our Elohim, has secrets known to no one. We are not accountable for them. Oh, that's intriguing. But we are, and our children are accountable forever, 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 for all that he has revealed to us, so that we may obey all the terms of these instructions. Okay, now let's go to chapter 30. In the future, when you experience all these blessings and curses, interesting that they're going to experience both. I have listed for you, and when you are living among the nations to which Yahweh your Elohim has exiled you, that's prediction, they were going to be exiled. Take to heart all these instructions. Listen, you want to get back to the promised land, you sons of God? Then you need to start following the instructions. We're going to get to that. If at that time you and your children return to Yahweh your Elohim, and if you obey with all your heart and all your soul and all the commandments I have given you today, that Moses stated during the Deuteronomy speech, from verse 1 all the way to from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 30 is Moses' speech. Then Yahweh your Elohim will restore your fortunes. He will have mercy on you and gather you back from all the nations where he has scattered you. Even though you are banished to the ends of the earth, Yahweh your Elohim will gather you from there and bring you back again. Do you guys know that technically speaking, if a person was standing in Israel, that America is the ends of the earth? Just saying. Okay. Yahweh your Elohim will return you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will possess that land again. Then he will make you even more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. Yahweh, your Elohim, will change your heart and the hearts of your descendants, so that you will love him with all your heart and soul, and so you may live. Yahweh, your Elohim, will inflict all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate and persecute you. Then you will again obey Yahweh and keep all his commandments that I am giving you today. Intriguing. We need to find out what commandments he's giving today, right? Okay. Yahweh, your Elohim, will then make you successful in everything you do. He will give you many children and numerous livestock, and he will cause your fields to produce abundant harvests. For Yahweh will again delight in being good to you as he was to your ancestors. Yahweh, your Elohim, will delight in you if you obey his voice and keep his commands and decrees written in this book of instruction, and if you turn to Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart and soul. Watch this. This command I'm giving you today, Christians, is not too difficult for you to understand, Christians, and it is not beyond your reach, Christians. It is not kept in heaven, so distant that you must ask, who will go up to heaven and bring it down so we can hear it and obey? It is not kept beyond the sea, so far away that you might ask, who will cross the sea to bring it to us so that we can hear it and obey? No. The message is very close at hand. It is on your lips and in your heart so that you can obey it. Now listen, today I am giving you a choice between life and death, between prosperity and disaster. For I command you this day to love the Lord, to love Yahweh your Elohim, and to keep his commands, decrees, and regulations by walking in his ways. If you do this, you will live and multiply, and Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in the land you are about to enter and occupy. But if your heart turns away and you refuse to listen, and if you are drawn away to serve and worship other Elohim, then I warn you now that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live live a long, good life in the land you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. Today, I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. Now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make, Christians. Oh, that you would choose life so that your descendants might live. You can make this choice by loving Yahweh, your Elohim, obeying him, and committing yourself firmly to him. This is the key to your life. And if you love and obey Yahweh, you will live long in the land Yahweh swore to give your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. I know I put that little suggestion in there. I kept saying Christians, and I'm going to tell you why. Number one, when I read this for the first time, I was cut to the heart. See, you read through, you do like a Bible, a 1-year Bible reading program, right? And it has you read like Genesis through Joshua in the first month or something like that. You don't get this, right? This doesn't apply to you because it is not the book of John. It is not the book of Matthew. It is not the book of Corinthians or Colossians or Romans. That is the sentiment. That is how it is. Where somebody would even get into the depth of this specific chapter might be in an Old Testament survey in theological seminary school, okay? And so because of that fact, there is a premise here that this could be missed. Now, the irony is that it's actually quoted in Romans, and I'm not going to get into that today, where it says it is not too hard for you to obey. And then translationally biased scholars translated it from Greek to English and intentionally said Christ is the end of the law, which is not what it means. But that also we're not going to get in today. Why? Because we need to ask the question. So there's two big questions. These are filters that you need to insert into your life. That if the intensification of all power in the universe claims ownership to a people and places an expectation on that people, one harsh enough that would cause an exiled land. This is what I want you to think about, okay? So we have a very large country right now who has enough manpower to completely occupy our land by force, okay? I'm not going to say who that is, and I'm not going to get into politics, but I can tell you if they wanted it, they could take it. Now, there's a part that's very, very important that you need to know. They are not going to leave you here. They're going to displace you and bring their people in. And I don't know where you're going, but you're going to work for a living. And I mean, you're going to survive by working, okay? Because that is the old sentiment of humanity, is that if a person wants to eat, they work, right? And so in that premise, I want you to understand that's what it would be like. You uprooted from your state right now and taken to another land to work that land on behalf of the people who would now live in your home. That is exile. Now, what's really important is if the intensification of all power in the universe lays claim to a people in relationship covenant, not land covenant, that was Abraham. Abraham's descendants get the land covenant. So that's going to be Ishmael. That's going to be Isaac. That's going to be the sons of Keturah, right? And every one of them practices circumcision, and they don't know. Some of them don't even know why they practice circumcision. There's tribes up in Khyber Pass who are absolutely not Muslim, not Christian, not Jewish, who circumcise their children, rest on the seventh day, and eat certain foods in the springtime to honor something they don't understand. Okay. So maybe that's sons of Keturah. I don't know. But you know that we have Sarah, Hagar, and Keturah as the mothers of the children of Abraham. Here's my point. That's a land covenant. But a relationship covenant, a marriage covenant is made between the people and Yahweh a number of times in the wilderness. This last one that's being made, according to verse 1, is not like the one that he did at Sinai or Horeb, okay? Now, the reason why that's important is because now what we have is a question. Who does this apply to and why? Well, it says it applies to the generations that follow forever. So if you are Israel, then you are under this accountability. And I hate that word, but the best way I could put it to you is that you are held to responsibility for these words, okay? It says that Yahweh has secrets that we are not accountable to, but the ones that we are accountable to are in these instructions today. Moses says today. So we need to ask, what was he saying on that day? Well, the entire speech of Deuteronomy, even though that it's 30 chapters long, is a speech that Moses gave to the people before he died and before they crossed the Jordan, right before, okay? So then we need to go through and ask the questions, what do we actually have? Well, we're going to kind of do a little bit of a cheat sheet here, and I'm not going to get too caught up in it, but the New Living Translation has subtitles. Now, I've told you before, don't look at the subtitles, but we're going to use the subtitles. I'm just going to blow through this really quick. I'm going to run back to chapter 1. Introduction to Moses' first address, right? Okay. And then the command to leave Sinai, right? All part of this speech. Scouts to explore the land, right? The Israel's rebellion against Yahweh, etc. So that's all chapter 1. Chapter 2, remembering Israel's wanderings. Yep, that's the wilderness season. Victory over Og of Bashan. That's a good recap. Moses urges Israel to obey. Obey what? The commandments he's about to give in chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a restatement of the 10 commandments. And then chapter 6, we get into a call for wholehearted commitment. Chapter 7, we get into the privileges of holiness. Chapter 8, call to remember and obey. Chapter 9, victory by God's grace. Intriguing title. And then what? A new copy of the covenant, chapter 10. And then what is in this new copy of the covenant? Let's take a look here really quick. And I know I'm not showing you these. I'm stating these to you. A call to love and obedience. Oh, that's intriguing. I thought that was a New Testament concept. And then we get into chapter 11. And starting in verse 8 is a bunch of blessings for obedience, right? And then getting into chapter 12 is your first command not to celebrate Christmas. Okay, so then as we move past that, then we have basically this moment here in, I believe it is in verse 31 is where the commandment to not celebrate Christmas is. You must not worship Yahweh your Elohim the way that other nations worship their gods. They perform for their gods every detestable act that Yahweh hates. They even burn their sons and daughters and sacrifice to their gods. Now, I know we're not quite in the process of blatant sacrifice of children, but we won't get into that. A warning against idolatry, that's for 13. And then 14, restatement of what is clean and unclean animals to eat. Intriguing. And then in chapter 15, we have the Shemitah and the Jubilee, very important. 16, oh yeah, I got to show you guys that. Bam! Restatement of the feast days. Okay, let's keep going. And then 17 gets into what type of sacrifice is suitable. And then in 18, a gift for the priests and Levites. Oh, a restatement of the tithes. Intriguing. And then in 19, we have the cities of refuge. In 20, we have the regulations concerning war. In 21, we have regulations concerning unsolved murders. 22, the way that you're supposed to take care of things. For example, the verse 1 says, if you see your neighbor's ox or sheep or goat wandering away, don't ignore your responsibility. Intriguing. Take it back to its owner. I'm not my brother's keeper. All right, regulations concerning worship. Okay, that's interesting. And then 24 also has to do with divorce and some other things. And then 25 it has to do with specific judgments. And 26, oh, the harvest, the offerings, and the tithes. Oh, and then 27, the altar on Mount Ebal and the altar on Mount Gerizim, right? The curses for Mount Ebal and the curses, and then the blessings for Mount Gerizim, right? And that leads us into Deuteronomy 28, and then we're back to 29. What's my point behind all this? This was a speech that restated everything Moses had learned and was now giving the people, if I'm going to die, if I know I'm going to die, I promise you, I'm going to come up with the most profound stuff I could ever muster for you all. As if I never said anything ever again, that's what it would be. Well, I developed a philosophy that I'm supposed to do that every Shabbat because I don't know if I'm going to die. But regardless, let's say I did know. I would definitely, I would dump it all on you. The stuff you don't know yet because you can't handle, I would dump on you just because of the simple fact that I'm gone and what's in here is going with me. Okay. So from that point of view, we need to understand that the feast days, the Sabbath, the clean and unclean animals, those ceremonial practices of sacrifice, which is the giving of the choice meat to the priest, the roasting of the meat, and you eating it before God, that's a sacrifice, right? The Shemitah, the 7-day rest or the 7th year rest of the land, right? And the Jubilee, the 50th year dissemination of property ownership, a return of everything back to its original owner, all debts canceled, all slaveries canceled, all prisoners released. Okay. Now, the process of all this says then that what Moses did is he gave us the most important stuff in Deuteronomy. But Deuteronomy 29 and 30 is the end, his conclusion of the speech, saying, what I'm telling you today is actually a proposal from the intensification of all power in the universe to enter into covenant with him, rededicate yourselves as his bride. Right? That's what's going on here. Now, there's a few reasons why that's important, and I'm going to tell you that in these next coming weeks, from what I can tell, because I don't think I could get through all this today, we are going to re-examine some things in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. We're going to get a better understanding of what was being said, the cultural elements, etc. Because as you know, any attempt to apply the ancient wisdom of Torah to your modern day behavior is a renegotiation of that scripture, a renegotiation of that word of God, a renegotiation of the law, the prophets, and the writings, a renegotiation of the latter writings, right? The letters of Paul, the letters of Peter, the letters of James, the letter of Hebrews, the letter or the narratives of Yeshua, the Gospels, or the Old and New Testament, a renegotiation of the Bible in order to make it work for you. And that is not what was expected of them. You can go back to Deuteronomy 12 if you want to know how much he definitely does not want you to adapt your lifestyle to his words. He wants you to adapt, or I'm sorry, how much he doesn't want his words adapted to your lifestyle. He wants you to adapt your lifestyle to his words. That's covenant. That's the action of covenant. That's the ratification of the covenant, the activation of it. Every covenant has its power in its action. Okay. All right. So obviously, one of the biggest things that we need to do is we need to accept that there is a law of first usage found. Okay. Let me explain. The Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, which would be, and I call it Gospels because it's the only way you're going to understand it. The Synoptic Gospels would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John lined together chronologically in such a way that you're going to start here, move to the next thing, and it may not be in that book, right? It may be like in Luke or Mark, right? Because the story narratives have to match up. Why is that important? Because it goes in Matthew, it goes lineage, birth, temptation, right? Lineage, birth, temptation. That's the simplicity of it. So why is that so important? Because by the time we get to Matthew, and I'm just going to show you this, if we were to look at the Synoptic Gospels, and one of the good things about the New Living Translation is it gives us the other references, okay? Every New Living Translation should have this reference system here of Ruth, First Chronicles, Luke, all that, right? So we can see in Matthew chapter 1, it definitely is the leader. It definitely takes the lead because it's Luke 3 before we ever get to this thing, right? So, or I'm sorry, not the leader. It's not the leader because it's Luke 3 when we get to the genealogy. I'm sorry, I got that reversed. But then moving into Matthew chapter 2, we definitely have the guys coming from the east. But now Matthew chapter 3 is the baptism of Yeshua. And then what? After that, the temptation. Now that's in Mark chapter 1. So really we should start somewhere in Mark. But here's the point behind what I'm saying. When he is led out of the wilderness, the first time Yeshua ever quotes scripture, where does he quote it from? The second time he ever quotes scripture, where does he quote it from? I'm sorry, that's the devil that did that, or the tempter that did that. Deuteronomy. The third time that he quotes scripture, where does he quote it from? Do you see this? The intensification of all power in the universe breathes, right? Now we know that that's anthropomorphical allegory for an emission of energy. That emission of energy is a force of benevolence, a force of benefit to the receiver. But as it works its way through the undiscernible, unlimited power of the intensification of all power in the universe, and finds itself as an actual instruction that will be interpreted by our imaginations and that would be interpreted by our understanding, it arrives as an instruction instead of a force of benefit. That force of benefit is accompanied with the blessings. The violation of that force of benefit is accompanied with the curses, which are reciprocations of behavior, right? But here's the intrigue. That force of benefit that we call the instructions or the Torah became flesh and dwelt among us. And when it came time for it to give an instruction as to what was the most important part of it, it chose Deuteronomy. He could have quoted the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, but he didn't. He quoted Deuteronomy. He quoted Devarim because Devarim means words. And here's the intrigue. These are all of Moses's words. This is the speech. And this is what the intensification of all power in the universe, stuffed into a breath, stuffed into a human, decides to put upon us first, to give us first, if we do the Synoptic Gospels. And why is that so important? Because it's not until after he's tempted does he begin his ministry. So he says, here is the foundation of my ministry. Deuteronomy. Okay? Now, Deuteronomy comes in the season of Shavuot, in the Torah cycle. What does that mean? That means it comes during the betrothal phase of the wedding steps, Shavuot being Pentecost. from Pentecost to Tabernacles is the betrothal phase. I go to prepare a place, right? Okay. Now, it would behoove us then to find out what actually is the instructions given. Well, we have 10 commandments, right? We have a reiteration of the 10 commandments, must be important. We have a reiteration of the feast days, must be important. We have a reiteration of clean and unclean animals, that must be important. We have a reiteration of how you are supposed to consume a sacrifice. That must be important. We have a reiteration of what you're not supposed to do with the customs of the nations around you. We have a reiteration of the tithes and offerings. That must be important. And we have a reiteration of an offer to enter into covenant that day with Yahweh anew. Now, if that Torah cycle falls in the betrothal phase every year, then there's an opportunity as we enter into the Kitavu, Kitavu, and then what's the other one? Netzavim Vayelech period in the Torah portions, then somewhere in there you're going to have to accept that those are the most important things for the Christian lifestyle. Remember, this is almost like a last will and testament from Moses. Yeshua, the intensification of all power in the universe in a breath down into a human being, becomes what? The prioritizer of the Torah, and he chooses Deuteronomy. Who chooses Genesis? Or who chooses Exodus? Or who chooses Numbers? The Pharisees do, to argue with him. He chooses Deuteronomy. He says that's the most important book. In fact, intrigue. Lord, what are the two most, or what is the most important commandment? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that specifically has to do with vengeance. However, it is very important for you to understand that that first commandment comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. And so what do we have here? We have another example of the priority of Deuteronomy. Somebody needs to wake up and say, it is very possible that David found his Messiah in the book of Deuteronomy, because Yeshua was apt to use it often. Now, here's the part that's so important. These are the last words of Moses, the Devarim of Moses, the words of Moses. This is a transcript of his speech. Now, you think about, if you have children, if you don't have children, maybe we'll go with best friend, right? But if you have children, I want you to think about if you knew you were going to die. And when I say knew, as in there's no guarantee, there's nothing. I mean, you either say it today or you might not get to say it. What is the most important thing you would have tell your child besides I love you? Because that better be the first. No matter what they've done or whoever they are, that better be the first. Well, what would be the most important wisdom that you could possibly give them? You know, there's been a number of songs, country songs, Christian songs that talk about, well, what would I tell you? What would I say? Right? These are the words that I would say, one of my favorite songs, right? Or live like you're dying, etc., etc. Guys, this is how this works. Torah is this beautiful orchestra of information, but Deuteronomy is the crescendo. And the crescendo is the only part where the emotions are heightened, the only time when there's excitement. Excitement from who? The intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a human, right? So, in premise, I think it is very, very important that we understand that our Messiah, who came only as an example, that's it, an example of how you are supposed to obey Torah, chose Deuteronomy for his arguments against the accuser, the tempter, and idiots, right? And so when we get our minds wrapped around that, we come to understand that there's an importance and acceptance. Now, there are 613 commandments, according to Maimonides, Rabbi Maimonides or Rambam. The first set is the 248 thou shalts, or what we call positive commandments. They are what you should do. You have to carry these out. 248, okay? And then we have 365 thou shalt nots, things you should not do that pertain to social justice, that pertain to personal justice, that pertain to equal distribution and honor, etc. 613 commandments that are expositions of the 10. There is actually enough in the 10 for you to actually do what you're supposed to do. But that would mean that you understand where those things fall. Now, I don't have a copy of it anymore, but there was a point in time where Simchat Torah, the ministry, Simchat Torah, made a calendar. And what they did is they compiled the 613 under the 10. So, for example, the commandments concerning the Sabbath went under the Sabbath commandment. The commandments concerning sacrifice went under the I am the Lord your God commandment, etc., etc. And it was a really cool thing. I don't know what I did with it. And I'm sure maybe somebody still has a copy of it. But the point being is that it was a really neat way to realize that the 10 contain what's needed. And here's the intrigue. The 2 contain the 10. And the 1 contains all of them. Love. Then we drop into love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Etc., etc., etc. Then we get into Talmudic or Christian bylaw, right? We get into Talmudic interpretation, which is basically the oral or Jewish folklore connection to the commandments, like what they decided over the years was the way to interpret this specific verse. And then a commentary of rabbis upon that becomes the Talmud. We have the Westminster Confession. We have the, I can never remember the name of that one. It starts with an A. And then we have creeds, etc., all based upon an exposition of the Torah. Now, you would think that Genesis was the beginning of Torah. It was not. It is not. Because who wrote Genesis? Moshe. So we could put Exodus as the beginning of Torah, right? But the truth is the law of first usage. And intriguingly enough, the law of first usage in every list that exists when Yahweh states it or Yeshua states it makes something the most important thing. So Deuteronomy, the last shall be first. So what do we know then? We know that if he restates the 10 and then expands upon that, that the 10 are the priority. What does that mean? That means that we are going to do an ancient Hebraic nomadic analysis of the 10 commandments starting today. And when we do, we're going to keep in mind that they were reiterated to the people in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, of Devarim. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to look at a specific word, okay? So we're going to go into Deuteronomy chapter 29, and we're going to go to the last verse, I believe it is. Yep, right here. And this is in the NLT. Yahweh, our Elohim, has secrets known to no one. We are not accountable for them, but we and our children are accountable forever for all that he has revealed to us, so that we may obey all the terms of these instructions. So who's accountable to Torah? Those who have had it revealed to them. So if you hear somebody say, oh, the Torah says not to eat pork, then you don't eat pork. Oh, the Torah says not to get a tattoo, then you don't get tattoos, even if it says Jesus on it. Okay. But here we go. This is the word I want to look at. The last word, which is instruction, is actually the Torah. Torah, right here. That is Tav, Vav, Resh, He. Tav, Vav, Resh, He. Pronounced Torah. Okay? Now, Torah is from the root Yara. Yara. All right? Yara is Yod, Resh, He. So, recall that when you have a Yod, a He, a Vav, an Aleph, or a doubled last letter, it is a child root, which means we can go back to the parent root without much effort. So in this case, we would just drop the He and keep the Yod Resh. So let's do that first. Let's go into our ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible. And let's put that here. And we got to take the H out because there is no H in the Strong's coding for the ancient Hebrew lexicon because we're only dealing with Hebrew. All right. And we run over here and we see that it is Torah, teaching, acquired knowledge or skills that mark the direction one is to take in life. A straight direction, knowledge passed from one person to another. Okay. But that comes from the root. We're looking for the PR here. There's our PR. That comes from the parent root, Yod Resh, in the pink there. The action is to throw. The concrete is a river or rain. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the abstract is fear. All right, let's talk about this. So, pictographic definition. The pictograph, Yod, is a picture of a hand. The Resh is a picture of a man. Combine these mean hand of man. Now, here is the nomadic definition. The hand of man is used for the throwing, a flowing of water in a river, a throwing of the finger to show a direction to walk or live, the throwing of an arrow, the throwing down of water in rain, awe or fear where one throws self to the foot of one in authority. Related to, and that would be actually Hey Resh and Aleph Resh, I believe. I don't know why, but the Hebrew did not carry over in the digital copy here. All right. So getting then into our actual stems, we have Yara. I'm sorry, Yar, Ya'ar. There we go. Ya'ar. A flowing of water in a river. Then we have Ya'or. Ya'or is a stream, a body of running water, any body of flowing water, flowing of the insides. Okay. So here we have Ra, where the Yod has been flipped around. I'm sorry, the Aleph has been flipped around with the Resh. To be afraid of, to have a strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. The flowing or quivering of the gut from fear or awe, to dread what is terrible or revere what is expected. Do you all know? Do you all know that one of the mechanisms of fear in the physiology of the body is to actually liquefy any solids in your intestines and colon. And the design is to have that not be a part of the information that is going to be going on with fear. And what I mean by that is that if there's an actual danger, there is a liquefaction of those things in order to facilitate any extra nutrients that could possibly be pulled out of them. Isn't that crazy? There, in our physiology, there is a flowing of our system when there's fear. Which means what? Which means Torah is dynamic. It flows, right? Torah follows the path of least resistance, which means if there is something that resisted, it's going to go around it. And you guys remember my teachings on wave energy. Now, what is really, really important here to understand is that this entire thing is hand of man. Now, you want some intrigue? It says in Acts chapter 19, right? Verse 11, I think. The Yahweh or Theos, so we could go with Elohim, works through the hands of Paul, dunamos, power or energy, right? And there's an extra qualifier in there that says that it is not common energy. We won't get into that. But the premise is there we have the hand of man utilizing the dunamos or power. That word dunamos is the same word that's used when the lady touches the hem of Yeshua's garment. He says, power went out of me. Okay, so now here is the part that's so important. The casting of the finger is pointing in the direction that you should go, can only be done by a teacher of knowledge that you do not have, which makes them the greater and you the lesser. You are the vessel of reception of instruction, which doubles as the word fear, in that you will bow your face to the teacher and obey without question. That is the power of the word fear. Has nothing to do with danger in the sense of there being a fight or flight reaction, but instead has to do with the acceptance that that thing is fearful enough that we're going to bow to it. And that will be important information as we get deeper into our Renewing Your Mind series. But today, you need to understand that the casting of the finger is the same as the casting of the rain and the flowing of the river. Those are all the same process of the idiomatic usage of this parent root. Now, here's the intrigue. The Hebrew word for teacher is moreh. The Hebrew word for the latter rains during the fall feast season is moreh. The Hebrew word for instructor is yoreh. The Hebrew word for the former rains is, I'm sorry, not latter rains, the first rains is moreh. The latter rains, which we think the first rains come in the spring, but those are the latter rains in the Hebraic agricultural time cycle, and therefore have their philosophical element to them as being late in the season. But the latter rains are called the Yoreh. The Yoreh is an instructor or a teacher as well, but a different kind because of how the pictographic Hebrew fits together in those two. Regardless, the word for rain is teacher, and the word for Torah is river. And the concept of teaching and instruction has to do with how fear is supposed to work, which is to cause you to put your face to the ground in obedience without question. Now, the intrigue of all of this is in the fact that Moses says that what he's saying today, let's go back to our blue letter Bible. what he's saying today is that we are accountable to obey all the terms of the instructions. That word terms in the Hebrew is going to be what is observed, but the key is davar. Words, devarim. And in the inline Hebrew, forward inline, we can go straight to it. Words of what? Torah. Words of Torah. Now, if that's true, then it says what is known is what you are held responsible to. Okay. All right. So that being said, what we need to do is go through, and what we're going to do, since we know that the 613 are stuffed into the 10, and the 10 are stuffed into the 2, and the 2 are stuffed into the 1, then we know that we can study the 10 and know the 613. If we were to practice the 10 correctly, but here's the problem. Remember what I said. If you try to adapt the Torah to your lifestyle, you are in error. That's called doing what's right in your own eyes. And you can read the book of Judges and find out what that got the Israelites. But I will give you a hint. It has something to do with the demonic authority of a nation. Okay? Now, it is very important for you to understand that if we can read the 10, and there's a reason I'm bringing up the 10, but if we can read the 10 and know the 613, then we can read the 10 and know the Talmud. Or we should be able to know the church bylaws. Right? So a proper interpretation and commentary is what we're looking for here. That's what Talmud claims to be. And that's what bylaws claim to be, is a proper interpretation and application and commentary on that interpretation and application. Okay? So when we're going through this, we're going to study the 10, not the 613. The reason we're going to study the 10 is because modern American Christianity, that is a part of a Western social democratic hedonistic culture, is going to have to realign themselves with the ancient Hebraic nomadic culture. But what they claim is that the 10 are important. In fact, I know of a pastor who is in charge of a church that one of my close friends goes to, who went through the 10, covered the Sabbath and applied it to Sunday. Or covered the Sabbath and applied it to your day off. Instead of there being the actual activation in people's hearts of the seventh day Sabbath, or the Sabbath on Saturday, he adapted it to his culture. So they never got it. They never heard the actual instruction of Shabbat. They heard what they were supposed to do. They heard how they were supposed to honor it, and they apply it to Sunday. We'll get more into that when we study the fourth commandment. But we need to start at the first. But what's my point? My point is that Christianity is trying to renegotiate the terms of the covenant according to their cultural design, which is Western. How is it Western? Because the Roman Empire conquered the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire conquered the Eastern Roman Empire, and what? Instituted Hellenism as its standard of politics, of lifestyle, right? Of language origin, etc., etc. Okay? So there's our Western. Social. What does that mean? Socio. Socio is the idea that there is a communistic and or socialist agenda built into the system of government that was chosen for the American people. And finally, we arrive at democratic, which is the idea of one man, one vote. And of course, you know, we don't actually have that, but we have something similar to that with the Electoral College. What's my point? Western, socio-democratic. So what's the hedonistic? Hedonistic is do as thou wilt and harm none. Do whatever you want. Go ahead and eat bacon because you have grace, right? Go ahead and get a tattoo as long as it says Jesus and doesn't have a demon on it. When there's no differentiation in Torah of what kind of tattoo you're supposed to get, because Torah says don't do it. Now, there are people who will argue as long as it's not for the dead, but that's a renegotiation of that scripture. The Jews never get tattoos. Why not? Because that's how they interpret it. And those are the people who were chosen to preserve Torah. So get over it. Now, having said that, and I think there's some intrigue here, in the fact that the idea that needs to take root is that perhaps we need to look back to the cultural design of the Torah, because it reflects a cultural design that we are supposed to adapt to instead of being patriotically attached to the Western social democratic hedonistic lifestyle. So we're going to re-establish the ancient intention of the Ten Commandments. So in the interest of our ability to do these things, one of the things that we need to do is we need to go ahead and choose where we're going to get those commandments from. Now, I would say that in the interest of what we've been discussing so far, that there is probably a necessity for us to utilize Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy is the actual reiteration of those words, right? Okay. So having said that, let's go ahead. Actually said here. Okay. Okay. All right, here we go. Israel together and said, listen carefully, Israel. Hear the decree, regulation. Yep. Did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive today. At the mountain, what a beautiful way to read that. As an intermediary, sounds like we might have a second. Check, 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 check. Better. Okay. So I stood as an intermediary between you and Yahweh, for you were afraid of the fire and did not want to approach the mountain. He spoke to me, and I passed his words on to you. This is what he said. I am Yahweh, who rescued you. I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who rescued you from the land of Mitzrayim, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow to them or worship them. I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim who will not tolerate your affection for any other Elohim. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even the children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. You must not misuse the name of Yahweh, your Elohim. Yahweh will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as your Elohim has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to Yahweh, your Elohim. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your oxen and donkeys, and other livestock. Any foreigners among you, all your male and female servants must rest as you do. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but Yahweh, your Elohim, brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why Yahweh, your Elohim, has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother as Yahweh, your Elohim, has commanded you. Then you will live long, a full life in the land of Yahweh, your Elohim, that Elohim is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's wife. You must not covet your neighbor's house or land or male or female servant or ox or donkey or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Listen to 22. Yahweh spoke these words to all of you assembled there at the foot of the mountain. He spoke with a loud voice from the heart of the fire, surrounded by clouds and deep darkness. This was all he said at that time, and he wrote his words on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. That's going to be sufficient for our analysis. So going back to verse 6, we're going to start in verse 6. I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. So let's start at the beginning. Before we get started, please understand that the more important element here is that we give our most objective, truthful interpretation based upon the ancient Hebrew culture, okay? Which means we're going to have to take and overshadow our cultural translational bias for one that more reflects the truth of what was expected in terms of government, politics, justice, right? Desert in terms of what somebody deserves to have, grace, mercy, and the actionable process of instruction within us, okay? So what do we know? We know, first of all, that these 10 are not too hard to keep. What else do we know? That they are not so far out of our understanding that we would have to get special revelation or vision because of it. We don't have to travel across the sea to find a wise man to teach us Torah. We do not have to receive special instruction from heaven concerning Torah. Don't get me wrong, there is an esoteric learning in Torah that is necessary for higher self-operation, but for day-to-day social justice, we do not need to go any further than what the instruction right in front of us is. But what we do need to do is not apply it to American culture. We need to apply it to Hebraic culture, and we need to understand that Hebraic culture, okay? We need to understand the ancient nomadic philosophy. not lifestyle per se, in terms of the fact that the Hebrews went from tents to living in houses and cities when they went into the promised land. The promised land was a renegotiation of the physical aspects of nomadism, but not the philosophical aspects. And that's going to be very important, because in order to apply the ancient wisdom to today, we need to use the philosophy, not the actions. And the reasons we do is because we are like the Israelites. We dwell in cities and in houses, and most of the time we dwell in houses that we did not build. Meaning what? We are just like the Israelites when they went into the promised land. Okay, so what we need to do then is we need to analyze this Hebrew from the beginning to the end, because these words evidently being first usage, Moses gathers the people together and begins speaking, and he ends at chapter 30. So what's important about that is to know that there's not a break in that information, right? Now, I think it's important to know that he did give more than one speech, but this is a compilation of all of them, and I will remind you, these are the last words he gives to the people, the last things that he wants to say to them. And so what does he start with? He starts with the 10, or what we call the Decalogue. 10 commandments, 10 words. All right, so let's jump into the Hebrew. Now, there's something interesting that starts this commandment, and it's true of both Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 6, and also, we'll just go there really quick, Exodus chapter 20. And the reason why I say this is because we need to keep in mind that preservation of the Hebrew was important here. Notice it says Anoki. Now, for those of you who do not know, Anoki is an ancient way to reference self that does not have the same value as Ani. Ani is maybe a shortened version of Anoki, but the premise here is that Anoki means something different than Ani does. Now, why is that so important? Because he chose that word. So what we need to do is we need to look at Anoki, and we may even need to look at Ani in order to really get an understanding of the difference between the two. So let's go ahead and let's do that first. Let's look at Anoki, because this is one of those Torah moments that only a rabbi knows, that there are two different ways to say I am, right? And intriguingly enough, I am that I am is not one of them. That's a different animal altogether, and an unfortunate interpretation in the English. Okay, so let's go back into our text and let's find out about Anoki. So Anoki is a primitive pronoun. What does that mean? That's it. I, first person singular, right? I. It's used 3 times. So let's see what those 3 are. 3 times in the King James. He replied, I heard you walking in the garden, and I was afraid. Afterward, the Lord asked Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know. Cain responded, am I my brother's keeper? Right? 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth. Right? In order to see all things I have created. So when we're talking about it being used 3 times in the King James, I think it's important to understand that it is a primitive pronoun. Now, I think one of the things that is very important here is that it is used it is used to express something different than ani. I want to see if it compares ani. It does. So let's take a look at ani real quick here. So ani is I, first person singular, usually used for emphasis, and should be more translated as for me, right? As for me. Adam had sexual relations with his wife again. She gave birth to a son, and she named him Seth, for she said, God has granted to me another son in the place of Abel, whom Cain killed. Okay. Look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood, right? When there is emphasis needed, that's when ani is used. In other words, there's kind of an element here that Yahweh used a lesser version of I to begin this discussion. What are the ramifications of that? And what is the possibility here? Now, obviously, in modern Hebrew, ani is used, anoki is very, very rarely used, and ani is just the word I. It doesn't have the same value that it had in Torah. But in Torah, it seems as though when you see ani, which is the aleph nun yod, versus anuki, which is the aleph nun vav kaf yod, there's a difference, right? But let's go ahead and let's look at the differences between them. So going back into the Brown Driver Briggs, we'll click on ani real quick and get that Strong's Concordance number. Strong's Concordance number 589, right? Contracted from Anoki, which is Strong's Concordance number 594, okay? I'm sorry, 595. So let's start there. Let's go into 595 and see what we can see and try to understand more about this idea of the I, quote unquote, I. And going into this, right off the bat, we see that it has an alternative reference right here as being anoki. So what's interesting is ani actually has the first connection. And when we go back to the parent root right here, we'll find something interesting out. So here's our aleph nun. Aleph nun is, and our action is to produce, right? Our concrete is to produce. So the action is to produce, the concrete is produce, right? And the abstract is where. Okay. Now, the pictograph aleph, let's go ahead and we'll highlight that part. And I think we'll use a different color here. And then here is the ancient nomadic part. Which we will get to here in a moment. Okay, so here we go. The pictograph aleph represents the ox, and the nun is the picture of the seed, plant, animal, or man. So what we have is ox or strength continues, okay? The male searches out the female and approaches her for reproducing. See Jeremiah 2:24. We'll go to that. Jeremiah 2:24. I think I know what this is going to say. You are like a wild donkey sniffing the wind at mating time. Who can restrain her lust? Those who desire her don't need to search, for she goes running to them. Okay, so we understand the ramifications here, right? This can be a search for the purpose of producing something. Okay, so now we have the first root is on. A ship searches through the sea for a distant coastline of an island or mainland in search of produce for trade. The fig tree produces fruit that is desirable and prolific. Since the fig is green and blends in with the leaves, the fruit must be searched out. Searching may result in success or failure. Are we seeing a pattern here? Look at whenever. Anywhere at all. A search for person, place, or time. Ana, I, a person aware of possessing a personal identity in self-reference through the sense of approaching, right? And that's our word right there, ani, right? We got anu, which is we, or a group of I's. That's important. I and the rest of a group through the sense of approaching. So an inclusion of self in a group. Bowl, as in the shape of a ship. Island, I'm sorry. Island, a tract of land surrounded by water, also a country in the sense of something being isolated or searched for, right? We're still working with that word search. Ta'an, ta'an is a fig or oblong-shaped fruit from a tree of the ficus genus, a desirable and prolific fruit that must be searched for. Back to searching again. And then we have what? Ta'ana, an occasion, the time of sexual urges when the male searches out the female and approaches her for reproducing. This word can also be applied to any occasion as a result of searching. So an occasion that is sought out, or an opportunity, let's call it, an opportunity. And then a variation is te'una. Okay, here we go. Anon, a complaining from lack of production, or a searching for an answer, a searching for production or produce, right? So complaining, a complainer. And then we have the Aleph Nun Hey, the seeking out of another to meet with, a chance encounter or an arrival to another. Okay. So we have ana, which means to approach or come near to someone, right? The time, and then we have that occasion again, the te'ana, the time of sexual urges when a male searches out a female and approaches her for reproducing. And then we have this one, interestingly enough, which is vigor, active bodily or mental strength or force, the power within the belly or loins for reproduction or creative work. Intriguing. And then we've got ain, which is like to search but not find a result. In fact, I'm sorry, ein. And I can tell you, ein is used for the concept of without, a lacking of something, or the inability to do or have something, the search for a place of unknown origin. And then ein is also a ship that searches through the sea. And then we're back to ani, right, as a ship searching through the sea for a distant shore. And then aniya is a large seagoing vessel searching through the sea for a distant shore. Now, what do we have here? It doesn't say I am the Lord God. It says I search for something. So the question is what is this covenant? What is this covenant? This covenant is a marriage covenant. How do we know? Because it's not like the one he made with his father. The new covenant is not like the one he made with your fathers when he took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of slavery, a covenant which you broke, even though as a husband to you, a betrothed husband, right? Okay, so what do we need to know? We need to know that everything that has to do with the word I in Hebrew has to do with searching. Now, I don't have to get very far into the depth of philosophy to say that that is the entire point behind the sentient self, is a search for meaning, right? A search for purpose, a purpose for existence, a reason that we're here. right? So this all makes sense. But he chooses Anoki, which is the lesser of Ani. Now I know that Anoki is the compound, or Ani is a compound of Anoki, but the truth is that Ani holds the precedent as the stem in the parent root structure, which means Anoki has a build on it. And we're not going to necessarily get into that today per se. We may a little bit, but the premise is that Ani would have been a more emphasized version. So he takes the lesser version of I, which actually means I'm searching for a mate. Why? Because this is a marriage covenant. Okay. And the word ayin nun means to search. Okay. So all of the stems from ayin nun have something to do with searching. In fact, even searching and not finding is contained in this parent root. So that becomes important, right? Now, all of a sudden, we know that this is an I that is seeking an occasion for intercourse, an I who is seeking an occasion for knowledge, a greater overshadowing a lesser, right? And so there's a premise here of a reception of a seed, right? There's a premise of a conception of an egg and a seed. There is a premise of a yeled, a birth occurring. And then there is a premise of a mother and a father, or a masculine and feminine coming together, becoming one, and becoming the I. Okay. Or I'm sorry, the we, the anu instead of the ani. Okay. And what's intriguing about that is the difference between the two is a yod, which means action, and a vav, which means established. So that's kind of cool. Okay. So now let's move on to the next part, because we need to find out here what the rest of the Hebrew is saying. Okay, so it says Anochi Yahweh. So let's talk a minute about Yahweh, because I think this is a very, very misunderstood thing. And when we get into the third commandment, which is to not take it in vain, we should probably understand more about it. So we'll just go ahead and continue following the trail. We've got Yahweh, which comes from Hayah. We'll go ahead and go over there, which comes from Hava, which comes from Ava or Haya. We've already looked at Haya, so we can go over to Ava or Awa, right? Notice this right here. Desire, incline, covet, wait, longing, wish, sigh, want, right? But if we go over to this one, we have something else. To be, become, come to pass, exist, happen, fall out, okay? Going back to Hava, we have that going to the primitive root to desire or incline. Okay, so we have our work cut out for us. Let's just start with the word Yahweh to begin with. And I am not going to, in any way, shape, or form, try to explain the pronunciation or try to argue how this should be used, because I don't think that is the part that's important in the third commandment. But let's go ahead and let's go here. Back to our lexicon. So far, we have some very interesting analysis. So getting into this, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's an entry for that. And that happens from time to time in this lexicon. So then we'll just jump down to that next root and go from there. And then there we go. And so I think one of the reasons why it may not be in here is because Jeff didn't want to mess too much with it. There's so much controversy over this name. But yeah, well, so to exist, right? To have real being, whether material or spiritual. Let's go ahead and let's go back to the parent root here, which is actually going to be hey, hey. We may need to put something on the board with this one, but the action is to breathe, right? The concrete is a breath, and there is no abstract. There's no abstract for the root of the name above every other name in the universe, right? You say, well, what about Yeshua? Well, we could get into that later. But the premise is the pictograph Hey represents one who is looking at a great sight with his hands raised, taking a long breath. And a double of that letter means that there's emphasis, right? The pictograph represents one who is looking at a great sign with his hands raised and taking a long breath, or gasping, like having in the first instance of it, the first instance of the root for Yahweh is woe, as in a heavy breath or a sigh, right? And then what we have next is be, where the vav is inserted. Be, or to exist, right? Or have breath. That which exists has breath. In Hebrew thought, the breath is the character of someone or something. Just as a man has a character, so do objects. Let's talk a minute about that. Because we get into this when we get into the word for name, which is Shem. Okay. So the premise is that Shem means the place of the winds, right? So the heavens means the place of the winds, Hashamayim, right? But Shem itself, Shin Mim, has something to do with the place of the winds. Now, don't ask me why it says to press the chaos, or don't ask me why it says to press the water, but it definitely means place of the winds in the stems, right? So that's another great mystery we can get into sometime. But here's the premise. The breath of a person actually contains the character of the person. Now, I know that that sounds a little bit off the wall because in our culture, the name of a person is actually what you call them, and it has nothing to do with their character. Somebody could be named David, Mike, Peter, Chris, and it not mean anything. But in the ancient Hebraic culture, a name reflected the prophetic emanation of who they would become. So you name a child with intention that that's who they're going to become. Okay. Now, when we get into the breath of somebody and character, we need to talk about what is character. Character is the way that you treat somebody you don't like when no one else is looking. I want you to think about that a minute. Character is your true heart towards your enemies. Think about a person who's an enemy in your life. And I want you to think about if you had an opportunity to do whatever you wanted to them and no one would know. What you would do to them is actually what your true wind is, what your spirit is. And out of the abundance of the heart, words come, what your words will become. Now, I know that's very difficult, what I just said. But the premise is that character is who you really are when no one's looking. And the way to really test that is who is at your mercy, right? That's the way you really test that. Being around loved ones when no one's looking, it is what it is. But how would you treat someone who you have no compassion for? Or how would you treat someone who you despise, or someone who you judge, or someone who you know deserves to suffer? Right? That, how you treat them when no one else is looking, is your true breath. Does that make sense? So now, how does that correspond to Yahweh. We have to study out this word a little more. Okay. That's going to require some work. And when I was confirmed that I was going to do the 10 Commandments, I said, that means we're going to have to study Yahweh. I really don't want to do that. Well, here we are. We're going to do it. So let's go to the board. Let's get this done. Okay. So a couple things that are important. The first important thing that we need to work on. Okay, let me get some colors here. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is talk about the yod. Okay. Now the yod in the modern Aramaic block characters is not the actual Hebrew pictograph in any way, shape, or form. In the modern Hebrew characters, it is actually well, I shouldn't even say Hebrew, it's actually Aramaic. The modern Aramaic characters that we use for our Hebrew language as modern Hebrews, or I mean, as Jews, we put the yod a little bit above the line because it's the first letter of Yahweh's name. But there's a lot more mechanical elements to that name. So let's start here. The yod is actually, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, a hand getting ready to grab something to do an action. Okay? To do an action. And I'm going to go ahead and change these colors up for you guys. So we have the yod, and that is doing an action. Okay? It can mean work in the sense of lifting or carrying something, because that's the definition of work, lifting or carrying something. However, the premise behind it is more along the lines of some symbolism of action. And we know that the world of action is one that is higher than this world. The world of action is actually a created world that contains no form. It is just a world of forces. And those forces have a direction and a magnitude behind them. Okay, so now if we're looking at these other pictographs that are important, I think we could also probably put an olive in here, okay? Because I think, I'm sorry, not an olive. Let's do a hay. We'll put a hay in here because I think that's going to become important, where we have the hay being the person. And you guys know that whole illustration that I do to illustrate that, where the man is looking out over the Mediterranean Sea and bearing witness of the magnitude of this body of water in front of him, right? So it's kind of a shock or whatever, but generally speaking, this means to witness or to behold. But generally speaking, has the concept of breath being the concrete. So when we're dealing with this, I think it's important to understand the difference between doing and witnessing, okay? And the power behind a witness versus the power behind a doer. Now we have one other letter that we need to get into here, and that is what is in one of those other letters that just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and people have tried to twist into something it's not, but generally speaking, it is that. And it is a tent stake, okay? And it means to establish or secure. Now, I know that people have gone to great lengths to try to stuff Christianity into this name and say, well, this means behold, right? And this is a nail, which is not true. It's a tent peg. And this is a nail. And so basically, behold the hand, and we'll just put another one in here. Behold the nail, right? No. That's not even the function of the grammar behind this word. And generally speaking, this is a really poor understanding, because one of the most powerful elements of I'm just going to go ahead and write it on the board. It's probably rabbis rolling over in their grave because I wrote the name of God on the board and I'm going to erase it. But the premise is what you need to know is that this is a feminine process. This is a feminine process. This is a masculine process, and this is a masculine process. This is a great mystery, which was mentioned today, that there's things we don't know, and this is what is known. And that is the power behind this name. But let's get into the grammar a little bit here, okay? So the reason why the yod is important, now I remember why I was going to put the aleph up there. So let's go ahead and let's put the aleph over here, okay? And you guys know, let me go ahead and get rid of this mess really quick. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do one better. We'll move it. Shrink it down and move it over here. Okay, now the aleph, obviously, as you recall, has this idea of strength, right? It means to be strong, and it's that ox's head drawing on ancient pottery, strong, always strong. But intriguingly enough, ani starts with an aleph, right? Ani starts with an aleph. So basically, in a weird sort of way, the aleph is basically in my strength. Oh, there's some Christians that are going to roll over in their grave today. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to kind of understand the connection between the Vav and the Yod and the Vav when it comes to the hey. So let's go to this next page. So what we have here is we have the name coming from this origin and coming from this origin. Now, what is the difference between the two? This is to bear witness of action. And this is to bear witness of security. Okay? Now, why is that so important? Because you see these two roots or stems from the parent root, which is hey, right? The parent root is simply just two hays. All right, and they both have the same symbol, just repeated, which means there's two witnesses. Okay? On the mouth of two or three witnesses, let everything be established. So one witness bears witness of action, and one witness bears witness of security. Action and security. Now, security in the sense of establishment. or thrive. Okay. Both of them mean exist. Both of these mean exist. But one is bearing witness of the action of existing, and one is bearing witness to the thriving of existing or the establishedness of existing. And I should say that thriving here is kind of the cause and effect. So this would be let's do this in a different color. Let's do this in light green. This would be the cause, and then this would be the effect. And in Kabbalah, cause and effect is very important. Okay, so now having gone through that process, the next thing I need to do is introduce you to the Hebrew grammar of the Aleph and the Yod when it comes to verbs. So, first of all, I'm going to use a word here in the Hebrew that is pronounced katal, okay? And generally speaking, when we teach Hebrew, we use this word because it has no special nuances to it, okay? This is called katal. Oh, no, I spelled that wrong. Katal, like that. And really, actually, it could be more like that, katal. Okay, that would be proper pronunciation of this. And of course, that would be the chametz and the pitzak, if you're getting into the nekudim. Okay, so now here is the part that's important. If I am going, so this means to kill. Okay, so let's go ahead and let me alter this. That's going to be important. Okay, so if I write this like this, whoops. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and put this here. And what you need to know is that katal is not to kill. That is what we call the lexical definition of the verb. But this specific verb structure that has no infixes or prefixes and is just the three-letter stem is first person masculine. I'm sorry, not first person. Third person. Masculine, singular, perfect. What does that mean? This actually says, so please understand, the way that, let me explain this really quick. Scholars in their infinite wisdom feel that the infinitive is the most important definition because it is the possibility of an ongoing action without beginning or end, but also it doesn't have the present tense to it. And so an infinitive means it goes on forever in any direction, past tense, present tense, whatever. You can say, I was going for a run. Run is in the infinitive in the English. It is used as a verbal noun. And so they believe that no matter what language you're in, the infinitive is the foundation of all language, right? Well, because of that fact, even though that the simplest form of the Hebrew root are three characters, that doesn't mean the infinitive to kill. It means he killed. So how do we get that to be he will kill? Well, the way that we get that to be he will kill is we add prefix. Now we'll get to this in a minute. And I promise you, this is very, very important to the name. So if you're getting lost in the grammar, get over it. You can rewatch this video, pause it, learn it, because I promise you, I'm giving it to you in a very comprehensive manner. But you need to get over it because this is about the name of your God, right? Okay. So in that premise, let's go ahead and get rid of this junk because it doesn't exist in the original scrolls or on any pottery, but not that much junk. There we go. Get rid of that and that. Okay. So let's see. I probably need to shrink this down a bit because we're going to need space. Okay. So the first thing you need to know is that if we were to say he will kill, we need to add a prefix. However, we're going to add a very different prefix first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change color here in order to add the prefix. And I think it's going to be thick enough that we won't have a problem with the red. So if I put an olive here, okay, this goes from the katal to, let's see if I can get this right here. Ektal. Ektal. And ektal means I will kill. Okay. So if you add an olive to the beginning of a three-letter radical, you are actually changing the tense from perfect to imperfect, which means what? It's not completed yet. Totally reverse those letters. Imperfect, it's not completed yet. I will, right? Still, so it goes from third person to first person, right? Doesn't really matter whether it's masculine or not because I is neuter, but it's still singular. I, not we. Okay. So ektal means I will kill. Now, why is that so important? Because if I take this right here, actually, let's do this different. Let me move this. I want to keep with the yellow. So, oh, that was cute. Oops. I want to keep with the yellow so that we can put that down there. Okay, I want to keep with the yellow. And the reason I do is because I want you to see the power of a suffix in Hebrew. Okay. So here's our original katal. And I'm sorry, not katal. Here's our Hebrew stem from the hey with a yod in it, which is what? To behold the action, right? Behold the action of existence, the action of existence, as if there was no beginning or end, right? An action of existence. And then we add this. Now, you want to talk about me getting in trouble for putting names on boards? This is probably one of the most sacred names that you could ever learn. This is yeah. You guys know what yeah is in the English? Well, I'll tell you, it's thrown around like Coca-Cola. That's what it is in the English. But in the Hebrew, what's it actually saying? Well, if this means to behold the action of existence, then this is, I will behold the action of existence. That's right. That's what that means. I will behold the action of existence. In fact, I'll get rid of this sacrilegious junk down here, and I will put what it actually means. And we'll put it in blue. I will behold the action of, oops, exist. You see this? You see how it's not I am? Not even close. I will behold the action of existence. I'll witness it, right? Okay. So now, having said that, now you understand why that suffix is so important in altering the tense. We go from he beheld the action of existence to I will behold the action of existence. You see that? Okay, let's do it again. We'll put our original reference up here. We'll put our original reference up here of katal. So as you remember the grammar elements, right? So here's katal, all right? And I'll remind you that it is to kill, right? But it's not actually to kill. It actually means he killed, right? He killed. So what happens if I was to add to this a yod? Now, this is pronounced differently than before. This is pronounced yiktol, yiktol. And it is he will kill. Okay? Yiktol. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to say, okay, if that's true, then we should be able to take the hey vav hey and do the same thing. So let's do that. Let's go to the hey vav hey vav hey, right? And then we will add the yod to it, which is our yod hey vav hey. So if this is third person, masculine, singular, perfect, he beheld the existence of establishment, or he had beheld the established existence, then it should read, he will behold the established existence. Now, somebody is going to go, well, wait a minute. How do you pronounce it Yahweh when it would be Yehovah, right? Yehovah. Well, I'm not going to get into that today. I want you to know more about the grammar here, okay? So we'll go ahead and write it how it would be pronounced as a verb, right? Which is going to be ye, va, okay? Yifa. And that literally says in the grammar, in the verb, he, let's not get ahead of ourselves with colors here. He will behold established existence. Okay? That is what the name Yahweh means. That is what the name Ehya means. Don't get yourself all twisted in any of the other stuff. This is the actual verbal conjugation in what? In the third person masculine. Make no mistake about that. Okay. Masculine singular. uh, Imperfect. That's right. He will behold, behold established existence. Okay. Established. Okay. Love my writing. Okay. So now, what does that mean for our 10 commandments? I humbly am seeking a mate for conjugal connection. And my name is He will behold the established existence. He will bear witness of it. He will observe existence. You know why everything exists? Because he has observed it as existing. Okay? Literally a name of the creator of the universe, but a perceivable understanding of the intensification of all power in the universe. Best way I could put it to you is that we can't go any higher than Yahweh in our understanding of what that thing really is. Yahweh is our best version of understanding that, and that is before a whole lot happens. In other words, it's dummied down for our understanding, and he becomes that exact thing of our understanding and nothing more. You can't go much further than father and son, brother, friend, or husband. Okay. But what you need to know is that the intimate connection that is sought in the covenant of Torah is a corporate collective connection. What you need to know is that there's no such thing in the Torah, the Nevi'im, Ketuvim, latter writings, narratives of Yeshua, or the apocalypse, or the great revealing that say that there are more than one bride. Now, there is definitely a communication that there's a false bride and there's a true bride. And that's very important. But there is not more than one bride, which means it's not brides. You are not a bride, but everybody together is a bride. The Anu, not the Ani, is a bride. Okay? Anu is a bride. So I think we're probably not going to be able to go much further than that today. And we're on commandment 1. In fact, we're on the first 2 words of commandment 1. And I'm sure your mind has already gone, okay, that's definitely not what I read in the English. And that's definitely not what I thought about the 10 commandments. And I'm going to blow your mind with something else. Go read the 10 commandments in front of the courthouse. I'll bet you they don't read the way that I just read them to you. Okay, so having said that, I think it's very important that we understand that this is going to kind of be an ongoing thing. I'm not going to prepare for it. We're going to be reviewing this de novo. We are analyzing this through the eyes of the ancient Hebrew nomadic tribal peoples. Okay, because that's the culture and that's the lifestyle that your Messiah lived thousands of years after Abraham, who was the first to really establish this culture, and also thousands of years after your Messiah, you are still expected to be living this lifestyle and making these choices. Okay, so having said that, we will definitely be moving through this until a certain time period, and then I'm supposed to stop. So I don't know how far we're going to get. But what I do know is that I'm already myself shocked a little bit by the difference in what I thought I understood about commandment number 1 and what commandment number 1 actually is. So I'm excited. This has actually been really fun today. And I know, listen, I told you, get over it. You need to learn this grammar to understand the power behind the letters, the power behind the pictographs. You need to get over it. And I know that that can be frustrating for some people. I know some people are like, I don't have time to learn another language. I'm not teaching you another language. I'm showing you how powerful these prefixes, infixes, and suffixes really are. And it's going to become important, especially when we get into, the Lord your God, what it actually says in the Hebrew. So bear with me on that. In terms of this so far, what do we see? We see marriage imagery. We see husband imagery. We see creator imagery. We see the double slit experiment, right? The observer bears witness of existence, right? So we see quantum physics, right? Which is exciting. Haven't even gotten into the word Elohim yet and energies. I'm excited. So I would encourage you to tune in next time, maybe get your friends to listen in. But this seems like it's going to be a really exciting series. And I didn't even know this morning that it was going to become a series, to be honest with you. Okay, so having said that, I'm going to go ahead and say Shabbat Shalom, because I think if I keep going, it's going to muddy, it's just going to be too complicated.